Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Drive-In Movies, the podcast where I talk about movies and television shows on my drive to work. Today, I am shaking things up a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a television show. And the show I'm talking about today is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, one of my all-time favorite shows, created by a writer who I have a great deal of respect for, Joss Whedon. You have absolutely not heard the last of Joss Whedon on this podcast. He's my favorite screenwriter, my favorite television series creator. He has created such popular works in addition to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He has, and by the way, I will absolutely be doing podcasts on all of these. He's created the spin-off series Angel, the cult series Firefly, the show Dollhouse. He has also directed and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He's a co-creator on that. He has also directed films Serenity, and more recently and probably most popularly, The Avengers, the massive blockbuster superhero movie from Marvel Studios. So he's a he's very prolific, he's a very busy man, and he's got a very unique style, which I'm going to get into with this show. So big Joss Whedon fan. If you've never heard of him, I highly recommend looking up and watching some of his stuff. A good example of something of his to watch, by the way, would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer. See, it all connects, I tell you. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is Whedon's first real foray into sort of mainstream culture. It was his first television show that he had created. He was creator, executive producer, writer. He did it all on the show. He's very he likes to do a lot of different things. And so the central premise of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is there's a 16-year-old girl named Buffy Summers who moves to the town of Sunnydale, California. And Buffy Summers is no ordinary 16-year-old girl, although sometimes she certainly tries to be. She is a vampire slayer. In this universe, there is one girl, it's always a girl, who is given strength and speed and agility, and it is her responsibility to use that power to fight against the seedy, demonic underworld, vampires, demons, other nasty things. There's lots of stuff, and they get a lot of material out of that. So that is the responsibility of the Slayer. Now the Slayer has sort of a companion, if you will, not to be confused with Doctor Who. The Slayer's companion is usually an older person, always British, a member of the Watchers Council, which is in England, and they sort of keep track of the Slayers and give them resources and all that. And so Buffy's Watcher is a man named Rupert Giles, which you can just tell is English from his name. Rupert Giles, it's a very, very English name. Giles is actually, Buffy moves to this new town. She goes to school because she's 16, and she goes in, meets the librarian at this new school, who she finds out is her Watcher. And she's very reluctant at first. She doesn't want to do it. She wants to get away from that life, but eventually she comes full circle with her responsibilities. She also makes some friends at school. Her two closest friends are Willow Rosenberg, a very, very shy girl, very bookish, much in a contrast to Buffy's sort of peppy personality and more outgoing nature. Willow's very reserved and introverted. And her other friend is Xander Harris, short for Alexander. And he's kind of a goofball. His main responsibility in the group is to crack jokes. He provides a lot of comic relief. He can occasionally be a little bit literal or naive, and there's some good comedy that comes out of that. And they also have a couple more characters introduced at the start of the show. Cordelia Chase, a rich, sort of snobby socialite who just sort of happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time a lot of the time, and eventually sort of starts working with this group. And then also Buffy meets a very dark and mysterious and very handsome stranger named Angel, and we learn quite a bit about him. I'm not going to tell you too much about him. So that's the central premise of the show. The show adds and deletes characters over its impressive 7-season run. It ran for a very long time, from 1997 to 2003, although the first season was only a half season. It's a very, very impressive show. I have to say, the basic idea behind Buffy the Vampire Slayer is high school is hell. So you've got these kids, they're in high school, and they are dealing with a lot of the issues that, regular high schoolers have to deal with. Worry about relationships or their sexuality, or, the pervasiveness of school teams. There's a little bit of mystery thrown in, issues of abandonment, and just, over the first 3 seasons, which is when they're all in high school together, they really draw on a lot of tropes of high school, particularly in the first 2 seasons. There's a lot of that stuff, and the metaphors are really good. One in particular that I always found was a really, really good metaphor was Buffy has not told her mother that she's the Slayer. Her mother knows something weird is up, but she thinks she's just like, hanging out with the wrong crowd kind of thing. She doesn't realize what's up. And so, at the end of one of the seasons, Buffy goes to her mother, and, circumstances dictate that she has to tell her. And so she says, Mom, I'm a vampire slayer. And, it's such a good metaphor for coming out as gay. It sounds so much like it. You get all the classic responses, well, have you tried not being a slayer? Just, oh my goodness, it's a wonderful, wonderful metaphor. And I thoroughly enjoy, actually, that particular episode because of that scene with her mother, which is really good. Now, Buffy, I'll talk a little bit later about some of the characters and how it evolves over the seasons. But I do want to talk about some of the, there's sort of a couple of different major aspects of the show. The first is kind of an investigative mystery. Buffy, I'm not going to say more often than not, but definitely a lot of the time sticks to the monster of the week formula. They discover something is going wrong, they do some research, they investigate, they find out what it is, they find out how to defeat it, and then Buffy goes and, beats it into a pulp. That's sort of their standard formula. And it allows everyone to participate. Giles gives information when needed. They do research, and it always happens at exactly the right time. So that's sort of your typical episode. That's how it's structured. There are a lot of atypical episodes, by the way, and I'm sure at some point I'll get into sort of some of the really, really good episodes. Some of which differ from this formula. Some of which stick to the formula, though. So that's sort of that investigative. There's a little bit of mystery involved. The second sort of big thing that goes on is that you've got an overarching villain for the season. Buffy coined the term the big bad, which is a really good term, actually, because it's the villain of the year. This villain has a plot that spans months. There's a lot of give and take. Usually there's a lot of beating up of their lackeys. Sometimes it's a vampire, sometimes it's a demon, sometimes it's something completely different. Actually, usually it's something completely different. And it's always really unique. I really enjoy Buffy villains. I think all the villains are really, really good. So that plays out over the season. And usually there's some sort of cost at the end. All right. The other thing that Whedon in particular has done this with every work that he's ever been in, is the screenwriting is just peppered with jokes and comedy in general. I shouldn't just say jokes, because there's a difference between jokes and comedy. But the screenwriting, he's a very, very talented writer, not just for his ability to do plots, but also for his ability to really just put in some high quality comedy there. There's a lot of good stuff there. It's very witty, it's very wry. It sounds like a bunch of teenagers talking. Sometimes their command of the English language is not stellar. But it does definitely sound like it's a bunch of teenagers going on in high school, and the classic stuffy British librarian gets some jokes, and the goofy Xander gets jokes, and Willow gets sort of social anxiety jokes, and Buffy's very snappy herself. It's really, really good. at the humor. And sometimes, you don't have to say a word. Sometimes it's very visual. A lot of sort of diffusing of tension using comedy. This is done in a couple of different ways, actually. There's a lot of good, solid comedy in this show. So it's really an action comedy show. There's plenty of action, lots of butt kicking, but the plots and the comedy are what really, really drive the show, for me anyway. That, I'm really big on plot and I'm really big on comedy. So I mean, those are probably the two things I notice the most as a watcher of the show. But but it's definitely a huge aspect, and so it's something that I feel needs to be drawn attention to, because it's an excellent show for that reason. Now, I want to talk about the seasons of the show and the characters and how they sort of evolve over time, but I am just pulling into work, and I am not finished. So, what I think I am going to do is I am going to make this a multi-part episode. So, I will see you next time on Drive-In Movies when I continue talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Talk to you next time.